Hello, today is Monday, April 22nd, and welcome to episode 326 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI's founder and executive director, Jamil, and I'm joined today by NSI's deputy executive director, Jessica Jones, and NSI senior fellow, Morgan Vina. So today we're talking about India and its upcoming elections. India is the world's most populous nation with 1.4 billion people. And of whom over 960 million are eligible to vote, and half of those are women. So this is going to be a big election. It started this past Friday. It will continue through June 1st. Election results will be announced on June 4th. The critical piece of this election, because India is a parliamentary system, will be the elections in the Lok Sabha, that is the lower house of the Indian parliament. Today, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, controls more than 350 seats through a coalition, 300 seats themselves. They're looking to actually gain ground and gain a supermajority of over 400 seats with their coalition partners in the next election. So we'll see how this plays out. This is a critically important election. India has, by the way, over 1 million polling places, 15 million election workers, and Indian political parties in 2019 spent about $7 billion campaigning for votes. So this will be a hotly contested election. It will be an important election, important for the United States, obviously, because of India's role as the world's largest democracy, and India's role as a potential bulwark against Chinese aggression. India, of course, for its part, has played footsie with China and Russia for a long time. They're part of the non-aligned movement. So we're trying to figure out what's going to happen in this election. It looks pretty well baked. Morgan, how does this all play out for American relations with India and for India itself?
Well, I think what we're seeing with this administration in particular is a real cozying up to India, particularly as it relates to the U.S. competition with China and India's competition with China for that matter as well. Last summer we saw a very, bells and whistles, red carpet state visit by Prime Minister Modi. We saw a lot of different partnerships come out of that, whether it was strengthening semiconductor supply chains to telecommunications, space, defense, critical minerals, you name it. It was a real kitchen sink of partnerships and really trying to see this administration build off of that. However, I think, as you note, India is part of a non-aligned movement, and there are limits to this partnership. They're not affiliated with any major power bloc, and they often side with interests in the global south. So this often plays out in multilateral institutions, but has bilateral impacts, as we've seen with India's relations on defense with Russia. So I think, though, specifically with respect to these elections, this is just an extraordinary undertaking by Modi. But we are seeing a democratic backsliding, not just in India, but globally. I think one of the most defining decisions that a leader can have into a leader's legacy really is when he chooses to leave office. And we've seen with Modi that instead of like taking the George Washington route and stopping and leaving after a second term, he's actually going to a third term. So I think a lot of this is very significant, particularly given his progress towards sort of those nationalist priorities. I think is playing a huge role and having an impact on a number of, across India, but specifically, clearly there are some human rights issues to be concerned about as well.
Well, just what about that? I mean, you got the BJP, a Hindu nationalist party. India's got 230 million Muslims, about 16% of their population. They have come under significant pressure under the BJP's rule under Prime Minister Modi, and even in the lead up to that with the riots and stuff that we've seen. At the same time, Prime Minister Modi is enjoying, 80% popularity. He's obviously modernized the Indian economy. Is this democratic backsliding because he's seeking a third term if he's so popular? I mean, there aren't limitations in the Indian constitution on him seeking a third term. Is this a concern, something we should be worried about? And what about that role of India in the world community and these human rights challenges that they've been criticized for? Because they are looking for a permanent seat on the UN Security Council as well, is what Prime Minister Modi has said.
I mean, you have almost 1 billion people voting. It's, by all accounts, Modi's incredibly popular. So the votes are legitimate. Democracy is, and I put in air quotes, working, right? The people that are getting the votes are remaining in power. And I think maybe it comes down to voting with the dollar. You see massive, infrastructure spending, highways, ports. You see the economy is now the 5th largest economy in the world, right? And there's to be clear, there's still high rates of unemployment in rural areas, but you see for a lot of people actual progress, right? And that's what they're focused on. You do wonder though, with the immense popularity of Modi, whether some of the clampdowns on protesters and opposition parties and politicians leading up to the election are necessary, considering, like you said, he has 8 in 10 people are in favor of him. What I do think is interesting is also the role of foreign policy when it comes to votes in India. It seems like when it comes to the average voter, that is actually quite important. They see Modi's foreign policy, strong foreign policy, as leading to international recognition and kind of clout with India. They see India remaining able to remain outside the Russia-Ukraine conflict. They continue relations with Russia. There isn't, I think, even a campaign video where Modi alludes to being able to stop Russia from attacking Ukraine so Indian students could leave the country in time. Right? Whether that's true or not, that seems like there's this faith in Modi as this strong leader. You know, we've talked about in the show assassination of activists abroad, right? And there's something there that is interesting because we talk about, of course, the role of foreign policy in American votes. I would just like to geek out for a second, Jamil. You raised how insanely huge the Indian elections are. 1 billion people voting. Everyone is guaranteed an election spot almost 1 mile from their home. So you are touting voting machines across jungles, mountains, and they have security forces that accompany the voting machines to make sure there aren't protests at polling stations, to make sure people feel safe and secure. And that's why voting continues through June, right? It is staggered so they actually can protect the integrity of elections.
I mean, Morgan, so what about the foreign policy piece that Jess just raised? I mean, you know, India's part of the BRICS alliance: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. I mean, should we be worried that, you know, India playing the middle ground and not firmly aligning the U.S. camp is a problem? Modi, you know, for his part, I mean, yes, he's had, you know, great state visits to the U.S. and the like. At the same time, he's immensely popular amongst the Indian diaspora here in the U.S. At the same time, he hasn't been fully aligned with the U.S. at all times, even though he's got problems on his northern border with China. What should we be thinking about all this?
So look, I mean, Modi has been very clear, and he emphasized this at the Munich Security Conference, that he does not see the world as unidimensional. He sees the world through a multilateral lens, that he sees the need to be sort of friends, not necessarily friends, but have a relationship and a working relationship with everyone. And that includes China, despite the competition piece here that the United States, you know, really does share. I think Modi looks at it through a much more dynamic lens. And more specifically, I mean, we not only see this play out with Russia, specifically with the arms sales and all of that, but also through India's dependence on Russian energy. So I think what we're going to be seeing here with Modi, and with India in particular, is a reliance not just on like the United Nations. I think the United Nations has actually, you know, lost considerable influence in recent years, despite India's goal to have a UN Security Council permanent seat. But I think we're also seeing India rely on a lot of these smaller multilateral bodies, whether it is the BRICS or others, to really try to sort of increase its influence globally, but through other means.
Yeah. Well, you know, look, as an Indian Muslim myself, I am torn about this, right? Because, you know, Modi is Gujarati, which is where my family's from 3 generations back. You know, he's been very successful at making India a powerhouse worldwide. They've really raised incomes and they continue to raise incomes. And he has been relatively friendly to the U.S., more so than other leaders of India in the past. And so this is a hard one for me, I tell you. But here we are. Folks, that's a wrap. Thanks so much to Devlin Burney, Claude Jennings, the NSI staff for the help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Wednesday, April 24th for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the foreign policy and national security debates shaking up America. Fault Lines is now on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. And if you like what you heard or saw on YouTube, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.